now we're joined by Jessyn Farrell, who's running for mayor. So go ahead with the 2-minute introduction.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here. I've been on this side of the table before doing endorsements. It's a huge, grueling process. So my name is Jessyn Farrell. I am current state representative for the 46th district. I have been elected 3 times now, so I'm in my 3rd term. I'm also the mother of 3 young children, 9, 6, and 2. I am an attorney. I have worked in the government sectors, the nonprofit sectors, and I am delighted to be running for mayor of our wonderful city. So there are a lot of progressives in the race. I am a progressive candidate, and I've actually delivered on our progressive values, whether it is for strengthening our public disclosure regulations on oil companies related to train safety, advocating for affordable housing, helping pass Sound Transit 2, authorizing legislation for Sound Transit 3, and protecting workers. Pregnant worker protections were signed into law just last week, and I helped get that legislation through. So I have a strong track record throughout my career of advocating for the issues that we care about and then actually delivering results. So then the question becomes, why am I leaving a fairly comfortable role in the legislature to run for mayor? And I have grown up in this city. I've lived here almost my entire life. And there is a lot of pain in the city right now, whether you are homeless and concerned about where you're going to sleep at night, whether you're a renter, wondering how you're going to make rent, whether you're a parent with kids, worried about schools, worried about traffic. You might be someone who's lived in your house for 40 years, and you're worried about how you are going to pay your property taxes. So I am here because I want to work on affordability, on transportation, on climate change, on equity, and I believe that I have the track record to really make a difference for our city.
Great. So now we have our 4 prepared questions that we're asking all candidates for mayor. These are 2-minute answers, and they're right in front of you if you want to turn it over and read along as we read them aloud.
Great,
And
I will.
David, will you do number 1?
What is your strategy for implementing, leveraging, and perhaps improving the incentive zoning program to create diverse neighborhoods and assure affordable housing?
Great question. So my basic value is that cities are about people, and that we need to be a city that accommodates every single person who wants to live here, every single person who wants to stay here. And furthermore, it builds our power as Democrats when our population is growing. And so it is important from an equity, policy, climate change, but also political power standpoint to be able to really accommodate the folks who want to be here. So I am a proponent of density. That doesn't mean that we take a cookie cutter approach and it's the same thing for every single neighborhood. So I am proposing a number of policies to make sure that the city has what I like to call housing diversity in every single neighborhood. And that really means economic diversity, where people can live in a lot of different places in the city. So how do we do that? Number 1, I think that we need to take a really strong inventory of all of the surplus property in our city, whether it is owned by WashDOT, Sound Transit, SPU, Seattle, and use that as the basis for a reinvigorated public housing program. There is no doubt that public housing is an important role. People like Gary Locke, got their start in public housing. My first job as an AmeriCorps volunteer was at Yesler Terrace. There's a really important role in the fabric of public housing. Number 2, as part of the transportation package in the middle of the night, I forced an amendment to keep $500 million in the region. That money can be used to support homeless youth. That money is going to start coming in 2020. We should make a commitment to house every single child in our community and to make sure they have the wraparound services to be successful. $500 million, surely we can do that. So that would be a second cornerstone of my program. Finally, I really believe I'm an activist. I started, my first job was at Washburn. My first job in the environmental community was at Washburn. And I believe deeply that we need neighborhood-based, community-focused planning. And so that's the 3rd piece of this, that we need all of our neighborhoods focused and a part of how we're going to achieve affordability.
Great. Liz, number 2.
In your view, what is the city's role in ensuring equal education and achievement opportunity in Seattle Public Schools?
I am in the legislature in part because I care deeply about making our schools work for everyone. And we have some work that we are going to get done eventually on meeting our paramount duty to our kids. But quite frankly, the city is also going to have to set up. In a legislature where we have divided government, we are not going to get an outcome that is fully suitable to Seattle, that meets the needs of the largest school district in the region, in the state. And so I think that the role of the city is really important, and here are 3 ideas that I have. Number one, we know that one of the major things that opens up the achievement gap is what happens during the summer. Privileged kids have all kinds of programs that they go to, and kids who don't have those same opportunities fall behind. I think that the city has a real opportunity to provide job training, music classes, enrichment classes, classes related to academics, to really help support kids during those summer months when they don't have the same supports that other kids may have. So that's really important. And again, how you pay for it could include that $500 million that's starting to come to the region in 2020. The second thing is I believe deeply that we should look at impact fees to support schools. We have impact fees in many other communities around our city, and we should look at that as well. Thirdly, Mayor Murray has really started to do some important things around the Families and Education Levy, and to start to invest in schools through that, through mentorship programs, through community-led programs that are being supported by the technical and financial expertise of the city, but that are really coming from the communities that are most impacted. And I would like to see and expand those and grow those.
Okay, Robert, number 3.
What are your specific recommendations for completion and follow-up steps of the Seattle Police Department consent decree and ongoing steps to improve department relations with Seattle's residents?
So I would say specific recommendations are that we actually stay the course. I think over the last few years, with the hiring of Chief O'Toole, with the accountability measures that have been put into place, are really important. But what I'm most interested in is how are we upstream making sure that people aren't interfacing with the criminal justice system. And to me, that looks like 2 really specific things. Number one, there are a lot of people who are in the King County jail system who may be there because they can't make bail, because of interfacing with the Seattle municipal courts. That's something that we can change at the city level, and that's something that we can make sure that we are changing. Another issue that we worked on at the state level and haven't had entire success, but we can also work on at the city level, is legal financial obligations, and beginning to change those so that you don't end up coming out of prison with debt, needing to be in prison because you weren't able to pay your obligations in the first place. A third piece of that, though, is again really investing in people upstream and really making sure that we are building communities that nurture people and that support children instead of shunting them off into facilities where they're not getting nurtured. So for example, I don't support the youth jail. I think that it's really important instead that we're focusing on community programming and again community-led efforts to build trust between the community and the police, to make sure that people as they're coming out of prison have the supports. There are a lot of great organizations like the Village of Hope, for example, that's providing supports to people as they're leaving prison, or youth and families who have members who are in prison. And so I think the city has a really important role to play in that upstream, but I think we need to continue the work that's been done around police accountability, building trust, and making sure that we're doing constitutional policing.
Great. Nicole, number 4.
Sure.
What is your strategy for dealing with homelessness in Seattle?
My strategy is based on 2 core principles. Number one, that housing is a human right, that every single person in our city deserves to have a home. And number 2, that there has to be some urgency around this. I have lived here most of my life. I think we all know that homelessness has gotten worse and that it is a moral outrage in our community. So how are we going to deal with that? So as mayor, I would really like to create a program that has urgency, before the next rainy season. It obviously isn't going to be this one because I'd have to get elected, but before the next rainy season, to get people into places where there's a roof over their heads. So there's been a lot of effort around tiny homes. That's not a permanent solution, but that near term, how do we get people with a roof over their heads? That's one. The second issue is encampments, and I think my critique of what the city has done is that it has allowed for encampments, but without providing the public safety, without providing the sanitation services and the mental health services that are necessary. So in the very near term, I think that we need to provide places for people to stay, not necessarily in our parks, not in, but in a sanctioned place where we can provide the services, provide the mental health services, the sanitation services, And I don't support sweeps. I mean, the bottom line is you can't take the meager belongings that someone has and then get rid of them. I just think that that's wrong. So that's a very, very short term, what do we do in the immediate future to help people get a roof over their heads. Longer term, on the affordability side, I already talked about that a little bit. You have to get people into homes. And so that is where you surplus property, that's where you use this $500 million to focus on youth, homeless youth in particular. And then neighborhood-based programs where you provide incentives for neighborhoods to come up with particular neighborhood-specific programs to help house people in those particular neighborhoods.
Great, so now we'll open up to follow-up questions. These are 1-minute answers, and we'll start with Ben and then Elizabeth.
So you talked a lot about community efforts upstream to lead the charge in providing support for homelessness, police accountability, and more. In poorer neighborhoods, many people are working 2 or 3 jobs to pay their rent and can't dedicate the time necessary to lead these efforts. How do you intend to include these people?
So what I would say is there actually are a lot of great efforts that are happening in parts of town where there may be fewer resources and even where people are doing 2 to 3 jobs. I mean, I think that I named one organization, the Village of Hope. And so I really see the role of the city is to help undo institutional racism by providing technical and financial support to those community-led groups, taking a supportive role, getting out of the way, but using the heft that the city has, both in terms of financial and technical expertise to support people. So that's one thing. I think that going where people are is really important as well. The city, the classic public meeting, come learn about the transportation project in your neighborhood. It's a small printed sign somewhere, and then it's in a building that isn't where people are. So I really think that the city has to go to where people are and listen and talk. I spent a lot of time at Pierce Transit, and I'm running out of time, so we'll talk about that in another answer.
Right. Elizabeth and then Liz.
So what are your ideas about creating more low-income housing, and your thoughts on taxes on foreign investors that are investing in housing, or houses, for example, that are being flipped too quickly, a tax on that?
So I think that a role of government is to create incentives to do the right thing and disincentives to kind of change markets. There's no doubt that there's an interface and providing a regulatory platform, a predictable regulatory platform for that. So our tax structure is a statement of our values, and so I very much believe that we need to do something like what Vancouver did and tax investments. We need housing for people to live in, not as places to park your money because you're a multinational conglomerate and know that Seattle has a hot market. So fundamentally, we need places for people to live. So on the tax side, I definitely agree with that. Then we need to look at all of the tools that are out there and available. For some people, it might be rental assistance. For some people, it may be actual, traditional public housing. For other neighborhoods where there's great transit service, we will want to talk about increasing density. But doing it in a way that really helps preserve the neighborhood character. Tree canopies are important. Cultural spaces are important. We need to have the communities involved in that. At the same time, we can't let any neighborhood off the hook in terms of affordability, not one.
Liz?
I wanted to let you continue from the previous
Oh,
question.
great, thank you. So with respect to outreach, so I worked at Pierce Transit during the recession in Pierce County. And at that time, we had to cut 30% of bus service because sales tax took such a dive in that community. And so the goal then became, how do we cut bus service in a way that preserves it for the most vulnerable? And the only way that we could make really tough decisions was by going to where people are and really understanding which bus routes, what times of the day, which stops were the ones that they needed. Did you need to get to a hospital? Was there a workplace that a lot of people were going to? So really the role of a city then is to do a lot of listening before decision making happens. That doesn't mean we get mired in Seattle process. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Pierce Transit had to make those cuts, but we did it in a way that preserved service for the most vulnerable, preserved service at the times when people were actually taking transit, and to those stops that we knew people really needed to stay connected to their communities.
Great. Robert?
In one of your interviews when you announced for mayor, you said something about having ideas for how to build Sound Transit 3 projects here in Seattle more quickly. Could you elaborate on some of those?
Sure. So, I've been in the state legislature, which is a very difficult place for Sound Transit, as you well know. But I would not stop advocating for a robust state role in transit. And so politics matters. there's no doubt that over the last 5 years when I've been in the legislature that we've had divided government and we're just not going to get where we want to go on transit. But let's say we are able to win the Senate next year. We need to tee up an agenda to be able to rebuild support for transit at the state level. Sound Transit provides a direct benefit to our highways because people are not driving on them. They are taking buses, they are taking trains. So that's one piece. Another piece is I think we do need to look at different ways to deliver the Ballard to West Seattle line. So one of the things I think that we should take a serious look at is we are building a tunnel already, the waterfront tunnel. Just as we negotiated with WashDOT to restripe I-90 and put light rail on some of those lanes, we should do the technical work to see if there's a way to put light rail in that tunnel. That would speed it up.
Another question or two, David?
We're faced with a wonderful array of candidates in this race. And I have no doubt that you've been an excellent state representative. But the mayor is an executive role. I'm wondering if you could comment a bit on any experience you've had that directs directly on the executive side of being mayor.
Great. So there are three parts of my resume that I'd like to highlight. So first of all, at Pierce Transit, I was part of the executive team that was responsible for reorganizing the organization at a time when there were very significant layoffs. And we really believed that you have to keep and preserve frontline employees first and foremost. And the executive level has to really skinny down. So I have experience being at a leadership level at an agency and making really tough decisions at that. And I think that's something that is unique to me in this race and others. So I would like to highlight that. Secondly, I've been part of the transportation negotiating team at the state level. So I know what it's like to go through a budget line by line. WashDOT submits their budget, and then the chair and vice chairs with the bipartisan partners or adversaries, depending on how we feel about a particular topic, go through the budget line by line and question, interview, and make decisions. So I've also had the opportunity to manage budgets. And then thirdly, I led an organization, Transportation Choices Coalition. Smaller in scope, but similar skills.
Probably one more. John?
How would you deal with some of the neighborhoods that are anti-density and don't want to see some of the things that you're advocating for? Current mayor has kind of told some of those neighborhoods what's going to happen here. There's a lot of other candidates who want to really push back down on the neighborhood level, empower neighborhoods. Where do you kind of fit in there?
So I think if you drive around Seattle, you are going to see yard signs in almost every single neighborhood that say things like Black Lives Matter, no hate, no fear, all of those things. And I really believe in every single neighborhood there are people who are compassionate and who care deeply about homelessness and who care about affordability. And maybe they're not worried about themselves, but maybe they're worried about their kids. And so I think that part of it is kind of meeting people where they are and putting it on the table, which is we are all in this together. If we're going to solve this problem as a city, every single one of us needs to do our part. So that's piece number one, and actually going into those communities as mayor and having those discussions. Second piece, though, is creating an array of tools that make sense. So for example, in Laurelhurst, there's the Talaris property, which is a really beautiful site. It has a beautiful tree canopy, but it's also fairly large. Is there a way to create affordable housing in a community that has a lot of resources? I think there is. And so I would love to work with that neighborhood to figure that out.
We actually have time for one more, if anybody has one. Short one. Clayton?
How should we think about the problem of circularity that seems to be inherent in increase in density?
What do you mean by circularity?
We have a program to allow ADUs in backyards, and that program is going to be increased, I think, by the city council to 1,000 square feet for independent houses. That increases the property value of that house, which in turn increases the property value of houses next door. That's one example.
Right, so I think the broader issue is what happens when you bring both transit amenities or density style amenities to a neighborhood. It can price people out, et cetera. It can raise property values. And okay, So I think that one of the ways you deal with that is we actually really have to have land use programs that are focused at the micro level. You know, not every block is the same, and not every community needs the same tools. And so if I were, and I am generally supportive of density and ADUs and other tools like that, but I really think that we need to look at the contours of every community in the city, and you can't do a cookie cutter approach. You know, what works on Lower Queen Anne isn't necessarily going to work in Wedgwood or in Delridge or other communities. Again, though, one of my animating principles is you don't let any neighborhood off the hook with affordability. But there's a range of tools, whether it's, like I said, rental vouchers or more traditional public housing, increasing private market density, that's definitely a tool. But we need to look at the range of tools and then tailor and work with communities to get those tools in place.
All right, we're out of time. If you want to take 30 seconds for a closing statement.
Thank you so much for taking the time to interview me today. I would truly be delighted and privileged to be the mayor. I know that this is a very difficult choice for all of you, for the electorate, but I really ask you to look at my track record on the issues that we care about, whether it is transportation, housing, affordable housing, workers' rights, climate change, and the environment. I am the candidate that has worked on those issues, both at the city level, at the state level, and I really have delivered on the issues that we care about. And we want someone who is bold, visionary, pragmatic, but also can deliver on the things that we care about. So I'm asking for your support.
Great, thank you very much.